and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. It's been a little over 2 weeks since Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced an impeachment inquiry into President Trump, and 2 documents were released that highlight Trump's efforts to get Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, Congress has reached the ultimate stonewall. The White House said that it won't cooperate with the impeachment inquiry at all. Today, we're going to find out what is happening during the impeachment process and how should Ukraine act and respond to this. To discuss it, we're joined in the studio today by Yuri Polakiwsky. He's a columnist for Atlantic Council and a political analyst. Hello, and thank you for joining us. So, as I have already mentioned, the House Democrats launched an impeachment procedure against Donald Trump. First of all, let's clarify what an impeachment procedure is.
The impeachment procedure is something that's allowed in the Constitution that allows the Congress to move against the president, if you will, based on not just breaking the rule of law, but also for high crimes and misdemeanors. So it's a very subjective process that happens in the Congress, first beginning in the Congress, and then the Senate is then required to put him on trial. That's what it is.
This is not the first situation when an impeachment procedure has been launched against Donald Trump. And every time his level of attractiveness has risen throughout the population of the United States of America. None of those procedures has actually been implemented till the end. How high are the chances that this time Donald Trump will be impeached?
Yeah, he's been investigated a number of times. There's investigations that are constant by Mueller and so on and so forth. This is the first official move of impeachment towards him. What are the chances of that happening in the Congress? Pretty high. In the Senate, we don't know because it's dominated by by Republicans. You asked about the process earlier. The process is essentially a political one.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot of politics being played out here, and they're going to use or abuse the system, or whatever word that you choose, to try to hurt the political future of Trump. So, but this is essentially a political enterprise or a political pursuit.
One of the reasons the procedure has been actually launched is the phone call Mr. Trump had with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Allegedly, Mr. Trump pushed on Volodymyr Zelensky to go into investigations against his future rival at the next presidential elections in the United States of America, Joe Biden and his family. President Trump claims that there was no pressure. Volodymyr Zelensky refuses to comment on the situation. What's your stand on this?
Well, it's not that there's alleged what he said. As you know, if you've led the declassified readout of the conversation, there was clearly pressure, or they call it quid pro quo, meaning that the president did ask the president of Ukraine
for a so-called favor.
For a favor.
Right.
Nevertheless, the focus on that is in where the high crime and misdemeanor is, and where the problem is, or where the problem is that whether he pressured him to do something basically based on the fact that if the President Zelensky did respond favorably, then he would have opened up or allowed for the money for the military money to go through. That's called abuse of power, and largely that's where the big discussion is. It's not so much whether in the conversation whether he broke the law by what he said, but the crux of the matter is that he abused the power that he had and used it almost in a transactional basis, which is Trump's focus anyways, to pressure for political gain. They many people will accuse him now of an abuse of power. That's where the crux of the matter is.
Nevertheless, the head prosecutor of Ukraine has already stated that the cases that have already been closed by the previous prosecutor are again being reviewed, and they are against Joe Biden's son and the company that he was on board in. The current head prosecutor of Ukraine officially stated that he was never pressured over reinstating the reviewing process of the cases.
I would say, being here for quite a long time, regardless of what any prosecutor says here, I take it with a grain of salt, and I just don't believe it. Okay. Now I don't know I don't know this prosecutor general, but I know I heard the interviews and the suggestions about Mr. Lutsenko or Shrukin. You cannot assume, or American audiences cannot assume that if you talk to a prosecutor here, that it's the same as talking to a prosecutor there. One of the biggest problems for Ukraine and what in this situation is there is a lack of facts. So Ukraine is now being ensnared into a political fight in the United States, which, in my opinion, it cannot choose a side. But what it can do, okay, what it can do, regardless of what the investigations are now being discussed, what they can do, if asked by government to government, is for the prosecutor to say, we will cooperate with American investigators.
How?
What I want, yeah, I think that's the key question. I hope that this is the takeaway. I think that the Senate or the Congress should send people over here, maybe even retired senators, to lead and oversee an investigation here. To get to have some type of document, if you will, that will say these are the facts of the case. Okay, and that's the biggest problem now. You can go to any type of sources on the internet, and you have this facts are being thrown out and so on. Yesterday, for example, one of the members of the Rada had a press conference, right, saying I have this and this. I don't want to mention the facts because I can't verify it. What I think has to be the key is that there has to be some type of document that there's a cooperation between the American government, if you will, and or Congress or Senate, and the Ukrainian government to finally say, okay, these are the things the facts that which we can agree upon, and that does not yet exist. Even though the investigations have gone on, nobody knows what the true facts are. And this is what the problem is. You can't just write you can't go to the United States and say, oh, this is a speculation, or this is what I think. Right. There has to be a fact finding.
It has to be based on the fact. Speaking of which, Washington Post poll shows that 58% of Americans are in favor of the impeachment procedure being started against Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, this situation does put Donald Trump under pressure. How high are the chances that being under this pressure, he would be more willing to open classified documents or let other politicians give testimony, let's say?
Well, first of all, talking about polls, they go up and down. It's very important to understand, not to react to what polls are saying. There's impeachment process is a process going to be a judicial process. It's going to be a facts-based process. And people are then going to decide whether or not they're going to support the president. Let's talk about the importance of that process, of getting the facts out and so on and so forth. I think this is the key. This is the key. Let's find out what the facts are, whether he actually broke the law or not. We don't know that. What we do know, for example, he did pressure that. We know he did pressure the president in that conversation to do him a favor, if you will. But asking and then what is actually being done are two different things. So the focus should not be on the polls. The focus should be on doing a proper investigation. The fact that we can all establish what these facts are, present it, and then let the people decide at that particular point what it is, if they want to go ahead with this or not. Let's not think about it in terms of the long-term future. That's a temptation. But let's because to impeach a president is a very big thing. It can have a great divide. It can divide a society, what it did under Richard Nixon and so on.
Right.
So we need responsible individuals. Right? There's a big political game on. Ukraine's got to be careful here about if it's going to choose a side. It cannot choose a side. It has to transcend the internal politics of the United States and be in a position where it says, here, these are the facts. We've opened up our the documentation that we have. Let them come over here. The FBI has already been working here. Let them work with 2 respected or 3 respected individuals, whether they be from Congress or Senate, and let's get a factual base and then go on from there.
Okay. In the meantime, before that has happened, if that is going to happen in any case scenario, what kind of a stance should Ukraine take? Neutrality?
Ukraine's being caught it's been ensnared. And what it has to be careful of, it must see that if it is being forced to participate, right? My suggestion to the government is that they think through a prism of over the long term. You see, Ukraine's got to realize something, that it has national interests, and that these are not sewn together, if you will, with a particular administration, whether it be Republican or Democrat. So they have to think further, have to think in the long-term national interest. If they choose a side in a political fight, they're going to lose. That's why I'm talking about facts here. Ukraine, as in its reaction, how it's going to participate should be this way. It should focus on facts. It must transcend the temptation of being forced to respond to the political theater that takes place there. This is extremely important because the opportunity here is that it's a way to present Ukraine in a new way. But many people think that Ukraine is like Russia. Well, it's not. But people think that way.
Unfortunately, a lot of people do think so.
It must think like it's a friend of the United States, that it's a security partner of the Western alliance, that it needs to espouse the sovereignty of international law, has those principles, Western-based principles. So let's start, in this case, let's start acting that way. To show that Ukraine is a responsible country, ready to follow a rules-based society and a rules-based process. This is the key. This is the key in my...
This phone call, the scandalous phone call, let's call it this way, that is surrounded by a lot of controversy, does it put any shade on the relations, on the bilateral relations between the U.S. and Ukraine for now?
Well, it can be. And this is what I'm saying, that the opportunity here, right? The opportunity here is to establish a new narrative and a new way of doing business or the relationship with the United States. It cannot be transactional. We always hear, the politics here are always transactional. What can I get at that particular moment, right? So this gives Ukraine an opportunity to come out to the world, if you will, in the United States in particular, and say, listen, we are turning over a new leaf here. We're trying to do things in a new way. We're from the Maidan, we're a post-Soviet society, now we're in a post-Maidan society, and what we have to tell the story is that we are struggling here to build a rules-based society. So Ukrainians, when they speak, and there should be, by the way, one voice in Washington or whatever it be, there should be designated by the Ukrainian government to say who will speak to this issue with an element of authority, right? But that is for the purpose of establishing a new narrative and basing a new narrative between the two countries. This is not, we cannot be transactional here. President Trump is being transactional. He's always been that way. We have to understand.
He's not a politician, he's a businessman.
It doesn't matter what he is, he's transactional. And so he only looks at two things. He looks at what the immediate gain is and how will it favor him politically. Fine, that's one way of doing business. But Ukraine has to look at it in the terms of what is going to be our long-term interests and what are we going to do. This is extremely important. And we have that opportunity to say Ukraine is a partner. We are a West security partner. We are a friend. We accept the investments of the United States into Ukraine in terms of building civil society and so forth. Let's act that way. Let's be responsible. Stop this freelancing that's going on with people going back and forth to Washington or New York and all that. One voice, not the president, one voice, speaking on behalf of the Ukrainian government and saying that we not taking sides, but this is how we want to participate. We will be prepared in response to a letter from the Congress, whether the Congress or Senate. We are willing to work with your investigative units to actually provide you with that information. We provide it. Maybe we write a report and say this is what we're doing, and then stay out of the political fight. It's dirty. It's going to be really dirty, and you have to understand that this is a political process to get rid of or to weaken Donald Trump.
Well, hopefully, I genuinely hope that the Ukrainian government is going to take your piece of advice and listen to it. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you.
That was Yuri Polakiwsky. He's a columnist for Atlantic Council and political analyst. Thank you so much for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned with UATV for the rest.